The desert doesn't care about your anger, it doesn't flinch when you curse the sun, the wind, or the silence that presses on your skull like judgment. The desert only watches, patient, eternal, waiting to see what you will do when the world refuses to bend for you. They say every man is born with fire in his chest, but only a few learn how to hold that fire without letting it burn them alive. The rest react, lash, destroy. But the wise, the rare, the almost mythical ones, they respond. That's where this story begins, in the forgotten heart of a town called Ash Hollow, where even God seemed too tired to visit, a place carved from wind and sin, where men measured worth not by gold or fame, but by how steady their hands stayed when life tried to break them. There was a man once, Elias Thorne, a drifter with eyes like dying embers. No one knew where he came from, only that he carried a journal bound in black leather and a silence that could hush a crowd. The townsfolk said he'd seen too much, that his calm wasn't peace, but scars turned inward. He worked at the rail yard, alone mostly, fixing the rusted engines that coughed like old men on their last breath. He never raised his voice, never hurried, and when the world spat dust in his face, he only wiped it away and kept working. But peace, in Ash Hollow, was never more than a shadow before the storm. One evening, as the sky bled orange into indigo, the saloon doors swung open like the gates of hell itself. A young gunman, wild and drunk on pride, stormed in shouting Thorne's name, claiming the drifter had cheated him out of wages. The air froze, bottles stopped clinking, even the piano fell silent. The boy's hand twitched near his holster. Everyone watched. Everyone waited. And Elias? He didn't move. Didn't even blink. He looked up from his glass, met the boy's fury with a calm so deep it made the kid hesitate. Elias spoke only one line, soft, but sharp enough to cut through the tension, a storm that shouts the loudest dies the fastest. The room shivered. The boy, unable to hold that silence, drew his gun, too fast, too desperate. But Elias didn't flinch, he simply watched. Then, when the moment turned into eternity, he stepped aside, and the boy's bullet shattered a mirror instead of a man. Elias walked past him, slow and deliberate, and said nothing more. And that night, every man in Ash Hollow learned the difference between reaction and response. But here's what most of them never knew, the calm they admired wasn't born from peace, it was born from war, inside. Years before Ash Hollow, Elias Thorne had been another man entirely. He had once worn a soldier's coat, fought in the border wars where the sky rained fire and men forgot what mercy felt like. He'd seen friends burn, enemies beg, and justice vanish under the boots of the powerful. And in those flames, something inside him had broken, or maybe awakened. He'd learned that reacting, with rage, fear, or desperation, only made him another piece of the chaos. But responding, choosing his emotion rather than being chosen by it, that was power. That was freedom. In the desert, there's a saying carved into old stone crosses where nameless men are buried, he who rules himself fears no tyrant. That was the creed Elias lived by. He trained his mind like a gunslinger trains his aim, steady, disciplined, unshaken. Each breath was a lesson, each silence a sermon. When the wind screamed, he listened. When pain spoke, he took notes. And over time, he discovered a truth that philosophers had whispered since the dawn of empires, that the greatest victory isn't over the world, but over one's own nature. Yet the world always tests those who master themselves, and Ash Hollow had a way of finding your weakness. A month after that night in the saloon, the town was burning with rumor, a caravan of gold was passing through, guarded by a man named Jonas Vale, the very commander who had once led Elias into war, then abandoned his men to die. The same man who had left Elias to crawl from the ashes of betrayal had now returned, and fate, cruel and poetic, had brought them to the same town. That night, as thunder whispered across the mountains, Elias sat alone beneath the water tower, staring at the horizon. He could feel the old anger stirring, that ancient fire rising from the pit he buried it in. The mind whispered, "Take revenge," the soul whispered, "Be still." The battle between reaction and response began anew. He opened his black journal, its pages filled not with vengeance but with philosophy, lines that read like commandments carved by pain itself. A man who reacts becomes a slave to the moment. A man who responds becomes master of time. Control is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of understanding. He wrote one more line that night, his handwriting trembling under the candle's breath. Tomorrow, I will face him. But I will not carry hate, only clarity. The next day came like a reckoning. Jonas Vale rode into Ash Hollow with 10 armed men, dust swirling around them like ghosts. The townsfolk scattered, and at the center of the square, Elias stood alone, coat swaying in the wind, eyes steady as the barrel of a loaded gun. Didn't think you'd have the spine to show your face, Jonas sneered. But Elias only replied, I came to return what you left behind. Jonas frowned. What's that? Elias placed the black journal on the ground between them. My anger. Then he turned his back and walked away. Jonas, drunk on ego, shouted after him, You think that makes you strong, Thorn? You think walking away makes you a man? Elias paused, half-shadowed by the rising dust. Without turning, he said, No. It makes me free. And that silence, that single choice, broke Jonas more than any bullet ever could. That night, the town whispered Elias's name like legend, not for the fight he won, but for the fight he refused to give. Because in that moment, every man saw himself, trapped between impulse and intention, between rage and reason, and they understood, if only for a heartbeat, that real power isn't the strength to strike, but the strength to wait. The days that followed turned quiet in Ash Hollow, though quiet there was never peace, only the sound of dust breathing through the cracks of time. The story of Elias Thorne spread through the saloons, the mines, and even the prison camps beyond the canyons. Men who once lived by the twitch of their trigger fingers began to wonder if maybe power wasn't in the gun after all, but in the man who could lay it down. And yet, the world does not let wisdom rest, it tests it again and again, until even the strongest soul questions the foundation it stands on. Elias kept to himself after the confrontation, fixing engines, mending fences, spending his nights writing under a dying oil lamp. But something inside him began to shift. His journal, once filled with Stoic notes, started turning into questions, the kind philosophers carve on tombstones when words no longer suffice. If I have mastered reaction, why does my heart still ache? If I am free from hate, why does forgiveness feel like weakness? If peace is strength, then why does silence feel like a cage? Because the truth was simple, even a Stoic bleeds. The human heart does not stop feeling just because the mind has learned to stay still, and Elias knew that discipline could dam a river, but never kill the water beneath it. One evening, a young woman named Mara came to the rail yard. Her brother had been among Jonas Vale's men, killed in one of his raids long before peace returned. She'd heard the story of Elias walking away, and she came not to praise him, but to curse him. You had the chance to end him, she said, voice trembling. To stop a monster. But you chose peace over justice. Elias looked at her, calm, weathered, ancient beyond his years. Justice born from anger, he said softly, becomes vengeance before it reaches truth. But Mara's eyes, burning with loss, saw no wisdom in his calm. You speak like a man who's never lost something worth breaking the rules for. Her words hit him like stones thrown into still water, ripples spreading through every quiet belief he'd built. Because deep down, he had lost something. Someone. Years ago, during the war, there had been a woman, Clara, who'd written him letters sealed with lavender and patience. When the bombs fell, her village burned, and he never saw her again. Her last letter arrived covered in ash, and inside it, one line remained legible, don't let the fire inside you become the fire that consumes you. He had built his entire Stoic creed on that single sentence, but now, hearing Mara speak, he realized he had used Clara's words as armor, not healing. He had turned stillness into avoidance, calm into distance. That night, under a sky heavy with thunder, Elias climbed the hill behind Ash Hollow where the crosses stood like teeth gnawed by time. He knelt beside one of them, an unmarked grave, perhaps hers, perhaps no one's, and spoke not to God, but to the silence that ruled the world. "I have learned to tame the storm," he whispered, "but in doing so, I forgot how to feel the rain." The wind howled, dust rose, and for the first time in years, Elias allowed himself to weep, not with fury, not with despair, but with release. Because Stoicism was never meant to kill emotion, only to master its direction. He realized then that response isn't the absence of reaction, it is the transformation of it, the alchemy of the human soul, taking pain and turning it into purpose. He spoke not like a preacher or a saint, but like a man who had burned and survived. "Every one of you," he began, "has been taught that strength means not feeling, that to be unshaken is to be untouchable. But that's not strength. That's stone. And stone cannot grow." The crowd listened, miners with coal-black faces, gamblers with broken hearts, women who'd buried dreams beneath dust. "The world will provoke you," Elias continued. "It will insult you, cheat you, test you. It will whisper that reaction is the only way to prove you exist. But listen closely, reaction is a chain. Every time you let anger pull you, you tighten it around your neck. But when you respond, when you choose your next breath instead of surrendering it, you break free." He paused, scanning their faces, watching the quiet ripple through them. "Don't fight your emotions," he said finally. "Train them. Let fear teach you patience. Let anger reveal your boundaries. Let pain carve your depth. That is how a man becomes unbreakable." It wasn't a sermon. It was a confession. And for the first time, Ash Hollow, a town born of violence, began to hum with something else, reflection. Weeks passed, and the rail yard grew quieter. The men worked with a strange new focus, fights in the saloon became fewer, and even the sheriff, a man who once settled arguments with bullets, started keeping a journal like Elias's. But every calm draws its own storm. One afternoon, word spread that Jonas Vale had been ambushed by a rival gang in the canyon pass. Most assumed he was dead. But by dusk, smoke rose on the horizon, and riders came bearing the impossible: Jonas was alive. And this time, he wasn't running. He was coming back. They said he'd sworn vengeance on Elias Thorne for the humiliation. Said he'd gathered killers, men with no conscience, no fear. Said he was coming not for one man, but for the whole town that worshipped him. Ash Hollow trembled. The people who had learned peace now faced war again, and the question became, would Elias stand and fight, or walk away once more? That night, Mara found him sitting at the edge of the canyon, his black journal open. She expected fear, maybe doubt, but saw only silence, not the cold kind this time, but a calm born of decision. "You can't reason with men like him," she said. "He'll burn the town just to see you suffer." Elias looked up, the moonlight carving a line down his face like a scar made of silver. "Then we will not fight him with fire," he said. "We'll fight him with stillness." Mara frowned. "Stillness won't stop bullets." He smiled faintly. "It stops wars before they begin." At dawn, Jonas arrived with his men, a dark tide sweeping through the sand. Guns gleamed, fear thickened the air. But when they reached the square, what they found wasn't an army, only Elias standing alone, coat billowing, eyes calm as morning frost. Jonas dismounted, snarling. "Still playing the saint, Thorne?" Elias's voice carried across the silence. "No saints here. Only men deciding which voice to obey, the one inside that reacts, or the one that responds." Jonas laughed, bitter and cracked. "Enough riddles. You're gonna die slow." He raised his revolver. The crowd gasped. But Elias didn't flinch. He simply said, "Then let the wind judge us both." And before Jonas could fire, a sound thundered across the plain. The canyon echoed with something neither man expected, the rumble of a storm, a sandstorm, vast and golden, sweeping fast and merciless. Jonas's men panicked. Horses screamed. Bullets flew blind into the dust. But Elias stood perfectly still, coat whipping around him, eyes closed. When the storm cleared, half of Jonas's men were gone, scattered, disoriented, lost to the desert. Jonas himself lay half buried, gun gone, face cracked with disbelief. Elias walked to him, knelt beside him, and whispered, "The world doesn't need your destruction to prove your worth. But it will keep showing you storms until you learn to stand still." Then he left him there, alive, broken, free to choose what kind of man he'd be next. That was the day Ash Hollow changed forever. No one saw Elias Thorne after that. Some said he walked into the desert to find the horizon's edge, others claimed he rode east to teach others what the West had taught him. But those who truly understood said this: he didn't vanish, he simply became part of the silence itself. The silence that teaches. The silence that tests. The silence that waits until the world stops reacting long enough to listen. And somewhere, out there in the vast, endless dust, his voice remains, not a shout, not a command, but a whisper: train your mind to respond, not react. Because the man who controls his reaction controls his reality. In the desert, there's a saying carved into old stone crosses where nameless men are buried: he who rules himself fears no tyrant. That was the creed Elias Thorne lived by. He trained his mind like a gunslinger trains his aim, steady, disciplined, unshaken. Each breath was a lesson. Each silence, a sermon. When the wind screamed, he listened. When pain spoke, he took notes. That was the day Ash Hollow changed forever. No one saw Elias Thorne after that. Some said he walked into the desert to find the horizon's edge. Others claimed he rode east to teach others what the West had taught him. But those who truly understood said this: he didn't vanish, he simply became part of the silence itself. The silence that teaches. The silence that tests. The silence that waits until the world stops reacting long enough to listen. And somewhere, out there in the vast, endless dust, his voice remains, not a shout, not a command, but a whisper: train your mind to respond, not react. Because the man who controls his reaction controls his reality. When a legend leaves, it doesn't vanish, it lingers, haunting the air like smoke that refuses to clear. It moves through men's hearts the way wind carves canyons, invisible, relentless, shaping them long after the storm has passed. That was Elias Thorne's gift, and his curse. In the weeks following his disappearance, Ash Hollow changed. The saloon still echoed with piano tunes, but no fists followed the music. The sheriff's voice replaced his revolver. And in the mines, where anger once lived thicker than dust, men began writing, not ledgers, not debts, but quiet reflections bound in cracked leather. It was as if Thorne's silence had rewritten the town's heartbeat, slower, steadier, wiser. And yet, even silence breeds longing, for when men learn stillness, they begin to hear what they once drowned in noise, the echo of their fears, the soft footsteps of memory, the quiet awakening of a conscience long asleep. Among those men was Abel Cross, the blacksmith, once the loudest skeptic of Elias Thorne's creed, who called restraint a coward's armor. But one night, with whiskey burning in his veins and fury in his hands, he nearly struck his own son. Shame sobered him faster than water ever could. Stumbling through the ruins of the old rail yard, he found a black journal half buried in dust, its pages fluttering in the wind like something alive. Inside, he read words that felt less written and more delivered, as if Thorne himself were speaking through the silence. When emotion rises, do not rush to silence it. Sit with it until it reveals what it is trying to protect. Abel read that line again and again, each word hammering through him like molten steel. For the first time, he didn't drink to drown the noise inside, he listened. And he found something deeper than guilt, understanding. He rebuilt his forge with calm hands and a steady heart. He taught his son not how to strike iron, but how to wait for the right moment to strike. And thus began the Stoic Code, the creed born from Thorne's words, whispered from man to man, turning into law among those who lived in chaos. Years passed, and the legend of Elias Thorne drifted far beyond Ash Hollow, carried by wanderers, drifters, and dreamers who swore they'd once seen him. Across the frontier, whispers spread, of the quiet gunslinger, the man who walked away, the monk of the desert. Some claimed he now lived atop a mountain, meditating above the clouds, others said he still walked among them under a new name, testing the world's temper one soul at a time. But no one truly knew. All that remained were the words he'd left behind, a weathered journal passed from hand to hand, its pages smudged with sweat, dust, and revelation. Men scribbled their own notes beneath Thorne's lines until it became something greater, a code, a creed, a scripture not of worship, but of wisdom. They called it the Stoic Code of Power, and within its pages were the truths that reshaped men more than bullets ever could. Asterisk, the man who cannot control himself is a weapon loaded by the world. Asterisk asterisk, the world belongs not to the strong, but to the calm. Asterisk asterisk, reaction is the language of the untrained. Response is the tongue of kings. Asterisk one worn copy found its way into the hands of Rhett Marlowe, a bounty hunter known across the West for two things, his temper, and his aim. He was a man who'd spent his life trading peace for gold, spilling blood to silence ghosts, never realizing that the loudest one lived inside his own mind. One night, holed up in a burned-out chapel, Rhett came across the tattered book in a dying preacher's satchel. He read it under moonlight, not out of curiosity, but out of boredom. But as the words sank in, something began to shift. He paused at one passage, every man you kill lives again inside your memory. Until you forgive yourself, your enemies will haunt you, wearing your face. Rhett couldn't sleep that night. He stared into the fire, seeing faces flicker inside the flames, men he'd shot, robbed, betrayed, and for the first time, he realized the real bounty that had been hunting him was guilt. By dawn, he buried his gun under the chapel floor and rode east, not to find gold, but to find the man who wrote those words. His search took him through ghost towns, battlefields, and monasteries built on silence, and along the way, he met others who'd been changed by the same words, a former outlaw who'd become a teacher, a widow who'd turned her grief into healing, a soldier who'd stopped fighting long enough to plant trees where bodies once lay. They all spoke of Elias Thorne not as a man, but as an awakening, a mirror held to the human soul. By the time Rhett reached the edge of the Sierra Plains, he wasn't the same man. His rage had burned away, leaving behind something sharper, purpose. He camped beneath a ridge one night and, as dawn broke, saw the impossible, a small figure standing atop the mountain, motionless, as if carved from the sky itself. No horse, no weapon, only a black coat fluttering against the rising light. Rhett climbed for hours, his breath turning to prayer, his heart pounding with something between fear and reverence, and when he reached the summit, the man turned, older now, hair streaked with silver, eyes clear as water. Elias Thorne smiled faintly, as if he'd been expecting him all along. "You found me," Thorne said. Rhett fell to his knees. "I found myself," he murmured. "Your words did that." Elias looked past him, toward the horizon that split gold and gray. "Then you understand," he said, "that the world doesn't change when men react to it. It changes when men reflect upon it." Rhett nodded. "Teach me." Elias shook his head. "There's nothing left to teach. The lesson is in the silence you've already endured." And so they sat together as the sun rose higher, painting the mountains in blood and light. For months, Rhett stayed with him, no sermons, no lectures, only days filled with labor, meditation, and stillness. Elias taught not through words but by example. When storms came, he didn't curse the wind, he studied it. When hunger struck, he didn't rush to eat, he waited until the craving passed, then ate with gratitude. When Rhett grew frustrated, Elias would simply say, "The moment you resist the moment, you create suffering." In that simplicity lay an entire universe. One evening, as they watched the valley below, Elias spoke softly, "Most men think freedom is the right to do what they want. But real freedom is the strength to do what's right, even when the world inside you screams otherwise." He paused, his gaze carrying the weight of both wisdom and weariness. I used to think Stoicism meant silence, he said. But now I know, it means harmony. To hear every voice inside you, and still choose peace. That night, a storm rolled over the mountain. The wind howled through the caves, lightning tore open the sky, and the world seemed to split between chaos and calm. Elias stood in the rain, arms open, face lifted to the heavens. Rhett called for him to come inside, but Elias only smiled. I have run from storms all my life, he said. Now, I choose to dance with one. He stepped forward and vanished into the tempest. Rhett waited for hours, heart pounding with fear and awe, until the storm finally passed. When the first light broke through the clouds, he found Elias kneeling among the rocks, alive, drenched, trembling not from cold, but from something holy. In his hand, Elias held his journal, open to a final page, the ink bleeding into the paper like veins of truth carried by rain. On it was a single line: to respond is to align with nature, to react is to fight it. And nothing that fights nature ever wins. He looked up at Rhett and smiled faintly, a calm radiance in his eyes that felt older than time itself. Now you understand, Rhett, he said softly. Years turned to dust, and the legend of Elias Thorne became more than memory, it became marrow in the bones of the world. His words traveled farther than any bullet ever could, carried on the wind by men who no longer sought victory, but virtue. In cities that had never seen his face, strangers repeated his creed when anger rose like fire in their chests. Children learned to breathe before they spoke. Warriors laid down their swords not from fear, but from understanding. And somewhere, beyond the edge of maps, where the desert melts into eternity, a lone rider still moves through the dusk, no name, no weapon, only a quiet strength that bends storms to silence. He rides for no cause, no revenge, no glory, only to remind the restless earth that peace is not the absence of battle, but the mastery of self. And though time will bury names, and even legends fade, the echo of his truth will never die, that the greatest victory a man can win is not over the world, but over the tempest within. Because the moment you stop reacting, you cease being a prisoner of what happens, and become the architect of what will.